Um, I'm ready when you guys are, I think. So.
Okay. Give me one sec. Because Jonathan Gordon wanted to say hi.
You won't even recognize me, probably.
Oh my God! No, I don't.
It's a good thing he said my name, huh?
You got old, man.
You gonna say fat, old, gray, and bald?
I got old and gray, and I'm working on not being fat. It's a constant effort.
Are you skiing right now or something?
Pretty much. That's the ski mountain. That's Mount Baldy. Any of you guys skiers?
Some.
All right.
Yes.
Well, Sun Valley is where I live, and it's pretty amazing. But so thank you guys. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. Little I know that 20 some years later, I'd have an opportunity to be worthy of giving one of these Friday discussions. So, how many of you guys have went to my website or read a portion of my book or know anything about me? Okay, a couple people. So, I graduated Case in what was it, '92, and I had a tremendous experience there. I really enjoyed it thoroughly. I learned how to be a student at law school. I started out at an undergrad at the Ohio State University, and went to work for my father for a year, and then he sold the business out from beneath me, and I didn't know what to do with my life, so I went to law school. So, like a lot of folks, kind of end up doing, and I did it in a fashion where, when I started law school, I didn't want to be a lawyer when I came out. I just wanted 3 years worth of education and to prolong, getting into business or whatever it was I was going to do. And in fact, when I started law school, I never thought I'd be a good student. So I thought I was going to be a malpractice attorney, suing other lawyers, legal malpractice. So you can imagine how many friends I made in my first year class, announcing that I basically intended to sue all of them at some point or another. So a funny thing happened along the way, and that was I ended up doing really, really well. I graduated 6th in my class at Case, and I got what I call golden handcuffs, and went to work for a very large law firm in Chicago, what is now known as DLA Piper, and was, in my case, I was fairly miserable practicing law and always constantly looking to do something else. And I found it fairly difficult as an attorney to get to transition into something else. So, I have some prepared notes, and I'm going to just kind of read through them because I think it's interesting. It'll give you some background, and then I can talk off the cuff. I can answer a lot of questions, and bring to bear anything you. I'm pretty transparent, so anything you might have, just jot a question down. You can interrupt me while I'm reading, my prepared notes. So forgive me if this does sound a little prepared. It's because it is. So I'll just start at the beginning. I'm Scott Jordan, CEO and founder of SCOTTeVEST, and the author of a new book called Pocket Man. It's the unauthorized autobiography of a passionate personal promoter. I was practicing law for about 10 years before I escaped from the law, as I call it. I was good at it, but I always had entrepreneurial urges. I even majored in entrepreneurship at the Ohio State University. I was miserable in my law career. It was well paid, but miserable. I even woke up in the middle of one particular night after billing, 250 hours a month successively, literally screaming, miserable, 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 no end in sight, and went right back to bed. I didn't even recall it, but my wife told me I did that. So I knew I had to get out before it killed me. I don't begrudge my legal training, however, by any means. It was the first time I really truly applied myself in school, and I learned a lot about detail and, of course, how contracts and law works. But it did not prepare me on how to manage people. It did not prepare me on how to follow up with people or how to stay on top of task or how to manage my time. I had to learn all those things on my own. So when I hit my breaking point, I was given the break I truly needed. My job as a legal counselor for a .com startup in 2000 was winding down, and I took the opportunity to start something on my own. This was a long and winding path to get to this point. From the moment I started practicing law in Chicago, I knew it wasn't for me, and I constantly tried to make it work for me. And I think that I knew the breaking point was that one day I found myself playing solitaire, and at the end of the day, I knew I played 2 hours worth of solitaire and had to come up with 8 billable hours, and I scratched my head and I couldn't write down hours that I didn't work, so I wrote down 6 hours, and I walked into the managing partner, Lee Miller, who happens to be the managing partner now of DLA Piper nationally, and I said, I need out. Help me find another job, working for one of your clients. And I knew that by doing so, it would be in effect my death sentence there. Once you announce to the partnership track that you want to go in house, you're no longer going to be on the partnership track. So I thought that as I had seen a number of other people in my law firm get placed at clients, I thought, okay, they just send me to their best client and, maintain their client relationship with me as their general counsel, and all would be well in the world, and I'd get to, do a little business and be a lawyer as well. But, I found that really wasn't the case, unfortunately. There weren't that many opportunities in clients, and so I was kind of like The Walking Dead until I got a phone call from a recruiter who said, I've got a great job for you. It's great paying and all these great things, and it's to work for Katten, Muchin and Zavis, which is another large law firm at the time, KMZ, just across the street. And I was like, really? I've gone to, hold on one second. If you don't mind, the noise is a little too much. Thank you. But I felt like, okay, I'm dead here. I might as well go over across the street, and that's where I went for a little more money, and it was just equally miserable. I'll never forget, after working a number of hours, one of the partners comes in my office and says, don't work for that partner because you're not going to get the right type of work. And the internal politics of a law firm are crazy. I mean, law firms just don't have a fundamental, they don't teach you how to manage people. They don't teach you how to work with people. They don't teach you really good organizational behavior, at least especially the larger law firms. They eat their young. And they encouraged me to do the same. I mean, they said, don't work for him if you want to get a future. And I was like, well, that's a young partner that I happen to like. How's he going to get people to do his work if more senior partners are telling, good associates not to do work for him? It was craziness. So, I began my search, for another in-house opportunity, and ended up as associate general counsel for a public company called Brookdale Living Communities, and BLCI. It's now, you've probably seen some of their commercials for assisted living facilities, and I went in there and I was equally miserable because I was just the lawyer. I was the associate general counsel, which is the guy who's the necessary evil. So it was a long and winding path to get out of the practicing law in my particular situation. And ultimately, they hired a general counsel above me, and I knew the writing was on the wall. I'd rather be on the partnership track at DLA Piper than of counsel effectively at a public corporation, and really projected out where I saw things going. So I ultimately quit that job and was asked to start a startup with one of the executives at BLCI for Brookdale for an internet portal called Next 50. And I thought, oh my God, this is fantastic. I get to be in a company, I get stock options, and they're, they can't possibly need a full-time lawyer at a startup. So finally, I get to do some marketing and some business and all these great things. And sure enough, I came into this company and I had to commute from Chicago to Princeton, New Jersey, to sit in my office and wait for the nominal legal work that would come across the desk, because I felt like I had a scarlet L on my forehead, that I was the lawyer. And the lawyer can't possibly be a good marketer or business person, and you're kind of branded. And so, when we get to the end of this talk, if it occurs to you that you're in law school for some of the reasons I was, that you're killing a little time trying to delay the inevitable, getting out in the real life, and you ultimately want to be in business, let's talk about ways that you can position yourself. So I quit that job after about 10 months. Ultimately culminating, my boss went to Ireland for a week or 10 days, and I thought, well, if he's gone for 10 days, the last thing I want to do is fly out to Princeton, New Jersey and sit at my desk, to show FaceTime when there's no one to show it to. So I stayed in my home in Chicago and did whatever little work they had, legal work they had for me. And when he found out that I didn't, show up to work, in effect, although I was quote unquote working, he was really upset with me. I said, I don't need this. I don't need to put FaceTime in if there's not even going to be a place to put, to show my face. This is ridiculous. I ultimately was even servicing other clients, with my door shut, with 4 people in this startup, practicing law, because all they wanted me to do was to quote unquote be the lawyer. So I racked my brain for ideas, and I had quite a few. And one that stood out was to create, in all my travels, I found that, my own frustration in a business casual environment was where to put all my stuff. I was at a fanny pack, I had a man purse, I had a backpack, and this is before, there was an iPhone, there was, and even before iPods were out there, Sony Discman. I was a gadget guy. So it occurred to me that, there's travel vests, and with all these exterior pockets, and there was also fishing vest. And if I could just redesign those products to look good and not have all these external pockets, and instead put the pockets on the inside or make it streamlined. And then it occurred to me further that I would patent the idea of incorporating wires inside the lining of the jacket, because, I didn't really want to make clothing, but I rather wanted to just simply collect royalty fees and licensing fees, and that's where SCOTTeVEST was born. It just from that epiphany, if you will. In fact, the epiphany came from, walking along the airport once. I'll never forget. I was in Philadelphia airport, and I'm listening to my tunes, and the wires are hanging all over me. And I walk by this doorknob, and it captured the lines. It snagged on the headsets, and it pulled my ear, and I literally thought my ear fell off. And it's happened to most of us at some time or another, that your ear, someone pulls on it, and it really feels uncomfortable. I grabbed the earplug, and I thought for sure there was going to be a piece of my ear sticking on it. And fortunately, that was not the case. And but it occurred to me at that moment to design something and patent it under a separate brand name, and I formed SCOTTeVEST in effect merely as a proof of concept. Let me take a breath, and where I thought that while I was waiting for this patent to issue, I would form a clothing company that would prove to other clothing companies why this was a valuable value add to them to incorporate into their stuff. Much like Intel Inside or Velcro or YKK zippers in sort of an ingredient brand. So in the months before the vest arrived, my main potential customer was Hammacher Schlemmer, and I actually did the legal work for their landlord in Chicago, and I got a meeting with their buyer, and and this was really as the internet in year 2000 was kind of in its infancy, and I was so excited because I thought that, with Hammacher Schlemmer, I can retire if I get just one account from Hammacher Schlemmer. And long story short, the buyer, after a while, stopped returning my calls. And finally, I just walked down to the office and said, "Hey, what's up? I ordered all these $60,000 worth of products in reliance on our conversation and these emails back and forth, only to discover that the buyer, was recently fired, or and he wasn't there anymore. He was packing his bags, and he introduced me to the new apparel buyer who didn't really fully understand what I was doing. And I was like, okay, so at this point, I quit my .com job. I went out to the world looking for another job, as a businessman, only finding that no one wanted to hire a lawyer as a businessman because my resume read like a lawyer and not a businessman, regardless of how I tried to spin it. And now my one major client, it fell through. So I then e-commerce enabled my site kind of as an afterthought. And as a result, that one afterthought, at that time made me SCOTTeVEST be the first apparel company to start on the internet. And to this day, over 90% of our business is direct to consumer. So I went into full court press, and recognizing that if I failed at this venture, I was going to have to go back to practicing law. So I kind of painted myself into a corner. And going back to practicing law was like, going back on my hands and knees to DLA Piper and saying, listen, I up, I love it here, give me another shot, and by the way, please put me on the partnership track, and I knew that was not going to be where I wanted to be. So I really attacked SCOTTeVEST with a high degree of tenacity. And, I put my product up for pre-sale even before there was such a thing as Kickstarter. I spent every day promoting myself and my products. And I even went to New York and just pounded the pavement throughout all of New York to every media property I could find, calling every reporter after every reporter until someone would finally interview me. It happened to be Time Magazine, and and we were in their magazine. I thought, oh my God, now I've really arrived. I'm in Time. If you're in, and this is when Time meant something, and and I had hired a call center, and the day it came out, not a single phone call because they forgot to put my URL or my phone number, and it was just a little blurb. And I realized just how hard it was to start a business, and yet I kept at it. So fast forward, after 15 years, I'm still running my company, SCOTTeVEST, and we have about 50 different styles of clothing with a multitude of pockets and features for men and women, ranging from vests and jackets and pants and t-shirts and even hats and underwear, all with the premise of adding more pockets, stylishly, and more features. I've been featured in Inc., Forbes, Fortune, Entrepreneur, Wall Street Journal on many occasions, New York Times, and just about any other publication you can imagine. I appeared on Shark Tank. How many of you saw that episode by chance? Okay, so it's really interesting. As lawyers, you'll fully appreciate it. I'll save that for the question and answer portion of this, which I promise you we're getting to. Hold on, I'll take a breath here. I really was able to embrace the controversy that came out of it. I found one of the things that by being a lawyer, I'm willing to take risk and say things and do things that, a lot of folks wouldn't do without their legal training to understand what the risks are involved. I don't have to call a lawyer up to ask, hey, what if I did or say this? I really like controversies. I embrace them. I have a philosophy that most people avoid controversies. It's human nature. And if in business, if you avoid controversies, you're avoiding about 50% of the opportunities out there. So if I can embrace them and leverage them to my benefit, perhaps even exploit them at times, it can be highly beneficial. So I live in paradise, Sun Valley, Idaho. It's in a great home I designed. I I drive the coolest vehicle. I'm really, created my perfect world. Yeah, as much as I've learned from being a law student and a lawyer, the life of an entrepreneur for me suited me better. If I was still a lawyer, I'd be living in I think in the suburbs of Chicago. I'd probably be 40 pounds heavier. And had been previously, jab intended. I'd be busting my ass, just for the almighty billable hours. I'd still have a nice house, hopefully, and a nice car, but I wouldn't be free in the way that I am now. A lot of people think that being an entrepreneur is risky, and yes, it is. You can fail at it, but you can also fail at being a lawyer. So don't think that law is necessarily, a safe path. I still consult with lawyers all the time, and they get paid well for their services. It's a valid path, and if you love the law, it may be what you're passionate about, and you by all means you should pursue that path. But know that your experience in law school varies very much from the practice of law. In fact, I absolutely loved law school. I really did. And I excelled at it. And I think because I loved it, I was passionate about it. I loved the Socratic method. I really did exceptionally well. And in fact, I don't know if your professors will like this, but I never read a single case in all of law school, and I just crammed before the exams and participated. And
Don't listen to him.
I did exceptionally well. Yeah, it's true. I really, I went through each class, and not only did I not read a single case or read anything, I participated in class. I actually raised my hand and never got caught out by, I don't know, whatever. So, there's a way to do it. So before taking some questions, I'd like to cover, three things that I cover in my book that may help you figure things out. And I wish they were told to me when I was your age. First is, if you don't know what you're passionate about, look back at what excited you as a kid. It's a clue. In my case, I was always passionate about gadgets, and now I found that I run a gadget-related company. So there's a direct relationship to that. Also, I was always passionate about cars, and I don't run a car company, but I've made enough money to buy a lot of cool cars, and now I'm driving around the country in this cool Polaris slingshot that I intend to race and kind of do a Paul Newman-esque thing with my business. Second, if personal freedom is important to you, know that you will never be as free as long as you need to account for your time in 10th hour increments. Just something to take into account. And three, you can learn more from a day of doing than a week of thinking. So if you're unsure about something, just simply try it. So, I think I'm about at the halfway point of our hour, and I'll open it up to some questions at this point.
All right, questions. I have plenty of questions.
Oh, come on now.
I'll start. You mentioned that you valued your legal education and liked a lot of things you got, not just intellectually, but that it has been useful to you. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about things about your legal education that have been useful, things that you might have wished you did differently when you were in law school. So kind of the pluses and minuses of your legal education for being in business.
Okay, so it's kind of several questions there. Let me try to answer. The pluses are that I can read a contract in an hour and know what's important and know what's not important. I don't have to send it to my lawyer and wait a week for him to return my call and another week for him to ignore my email, and I can get on a lot quicker. I don't have to retain lawyers. And I think most business people, the moment, you get an email with a contract, they get nervous and they send it to the lawyer. And, and it slows business down to a halt. So I think that is to being able to evaluate, the risk, primarily the risk, and know that most people are scared of lawyers and scared of the law, and to know that for the most part, the law moves so slowly and it's so costly, and I think when people know I'm a lawyer, they get a little nervous, and yet they it gives me some credibility, and it enables me to move quicker. And and the flip side of that is that when they know I'm a lawyer, they get nervous. I mean, a perfect example is, and therefore it sometimes makes doing business harder. Oftentimes makes doing business harder. For example, when I was in Chicago, I got a cease and desist letter from Scott USA, which makes ski poles and goggles, saying, your name of your company is SCOTTeVEST. Our name of our company is Scott USA. You shouldn't be using the Scott in the name of your company, and if you don't stop, you're. And I pretty much read the letter, and I actually did forward it to my attorney at the time, because patent law and copyright law, at least patent law, copyright law or trademark law, is not as complicated once you learn the ins and outs. But you get a threatening letter from a big law firm, you get a little nervous, rightfully so. And I responded something along the lines, "We don't believe we're copying, and it's a different company," and basically, digging our heels in, and I thought that was that. And then I moved to Sun Valley about 6 months later, and unbeknownst to me, Scott USA was based in Sun Valley, Idaho. And and they thought, and I put a big SCOTTeVEST sign up on the side of my building, and I get served, literally not another letter. I just get straight up served with a lawsuit. And they thought that I moved here to further confuse all the customers that were calling us up to buy our ski poles and goggles and bikes when we're selling gadget clothing, and we had no intention of confusing them. But I literally had to go through a litigation that cost me a great deal of money and aggravation, solely because they thought that I would somehow try to and ultimately we settled the lawsuit exactly where I would have ended up if they had reached me in the beginning, and that is I changed my font on my logo so it didn't resemble the font on their logo, and $100,000 wasted just to get to that point. And I asked the CEO of the business, at the end of the day, why we didn't have a rational discussion at the outset. And he says, well, because you're a lawyer, we were concerned that you would use your magical legal powers, these aren't his words, on us in a room. And therefore, we took it to that level. And it got uglier. I mean, I'll share with you a story that I convey in the book, Pocket Man, which is a really entertaining book. If any of you guys, you have a free download to do it, read the book. It'll take you 2 hours to read it. Don't read your cases. I've just told you don't need to do that. So, but in the book, I talk about this particular, negotiation, and at the end of the day, we're in court-ordered mediation in federal court in Boise, Idaho. I've got my local counsel. I've got my other counsel. They have their counsel, and we're all sitting around. They say, okay, we'll agree to to change your logo, but we need you to pay $60,000 for our legal fees. I said, you got to be kidding me. I can't, it's ridiculous. See, this is where we would have started. So this is my lawyer telling me what their proposal is for the proposed settlement. So I turned to my lawyer. I said, listen, you're my lawyer. You're required to convey to the opposing counsel my response. And he says, yes. I said, okay, write this down. And he says, I'll remember. And I said, no, get a piece of paper out, because I really want you to get the essence of what I'm saying verbatim. I said, to be clear, they're offering to settle exactly where I would have settled from day one, and yet with the added criteria or requirement, I've got to pay $60,000 of their legal fees in addition to the 40 I'm paying you guys. So that's the context. So I said, he says, yeah, that's basically where we are. And yet they chose this forum to resolve, they chose litigation to do this. They could have, he said, yeah, I get it. You're pissed. And I said, okay, so this is where I want you to go back to him. Say, I will accept the terms to change my logo as I originally agreed, which was their point number one. And I said, their point number two, where they wanted me to pay their legal fees. And I said, now this is the part where I need you to pick up your pen and start writing down my response. You tell the other counsel and or the judge, as the case may be, the following. And he's like, okay, I'm writing. What's all the drama? I said, tell him to. I said, that's ridiculous. I'm not gonna do that. He says, so you really want me to say that? I said, yeah. I said, this is ridiculous. And he says, well, I'm not going to say that. I said, then you're fired. And he said, so he went back and he said, okay, they agree. And the funny thing is the guy who on the other side of the table, the other lawyer, read my book, and he's like, did you really tell your lawyer that? And because he never conveyed that to me. So make a long story short, you can see, there's pluses and minuses. I don't know if I've answered your question fully, but you can ask a subsequent question, or or say, I get it.
Well, other questions.
So one of the skill sets, in terms of becoming an entrepreneur, of course, are some of the things you learn here. But clearly, you entered a field in which you didn't have any really prior experience. Like, you weren't a technologist, you hadn't invented anything before, weren't really somebody who was a technical design person at the time you came up with the idea. And so, when you're at that idea phase, the next step to implementation is what's interesting here. How did you find the people and the resources to help you go from idea to at least prototyping and implementation? Where did that knowledge base come from?
That's a great question.
What did you have to also build?
Now, so to answer that, in my case, once I started asking people and telling people what I had in mind, you'd be surprised. Everyone knows someone who knows someone who knows someone who can get products produced in China. It just, and I never knew it until I started asking the question. The real goal is to find as few people along the way, because no one's doing you a favor. Everyone in that chain wants a percentage of that deal. So the real goal is to find the closest to the person who really knows the factory in China that will get the product made. So that's number one. So it's the manufacturing of the product was really important, but the design was equally important. And there's something about the manufacturing. I'll talk about the design, because you can't get to manufacturing before you do the design. But the manufacturing, I am literally the only clothing producer, and maybe the only manufacturer in the entire world, I venture to guess, who has been manufacturing a product for 14 years, who has never been to visit their factory, ever. Factories. I've been able to, using the internet, video, Skype, drawings, to communicate contracts, what I want done, clearly enough, that has never required that I actually shake a hand in China. And now, one might argue that's the stupidest thing in the world. Maybe if I would build that relationship, I'd save a buck a garment, and maybe but the time it takes to go over there and do that, is something that I could be doing marketing here. So that's one half of the equation. The other half is, I hired a designer, who helped me design the very first product, and we went through a prototyping process, and she did a good job. Although I've later learned that there's nothing rocket science about making clothing. It's been done for thousands of years. and the way in which I was making clothing was different than the way anyone else was making it. And it's really engineering. So any other clothing designer I would hire would not be able to understand the level of technical expertise needed to design a pocket that would hold, an iPhone 6 Plus and balance it in such a fashion that doesn't rub up against you. It's really, I really realized that, I can do it myself. I took staples and I would, put a pocket where I want. I measured all the different types of devices and tried to design the line of clothing. I just did it myself. I rolled up my sleeves and then I would hire consultants when I needed them for different parts of it. But ultimately, every aspect of my business, especially PR, aspects, and even up to designing the website, I bought an HTML for dummies and I learned a little, Photoshop before it was even called Photoshop, and then just hire people and stay on top of them. I mean, I guess it's a lot of tenacity and and a lot of recognizing that there's no magic science to it. That you just the information is out there even more so today than it was when I did this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then the final capital is capital and investors. The initial capital came from, and then did you get any outside investors?
Yeah, that's a great question because I thought, I thought I needed outside capital. It seems like every business, it needs outside capital to make you can't build, in my case, a $50 million business with, eventually, without, having some money. I started going down that path, and what I realized was the amount of time and energy I would have to spend in raising money versus raising it and then communicating with these investors versus just looking at my available resources. In my case, a second home, mortgage on my home, that I went that route and I never looked back. So we don't have any outside investors. I took a home equity loan on my home. It was at a time when all you needed was a good credit score to get a home equity loan. And I started my entire business on effectively $70,000, of a home equity loan, and we were cash flowing, basically since our second year in business, which is highly uncommon. But I ran my business, every single day, understanding that I had to be profitable. I didn't have investors to fall back on. And I looked for an SBA loan, and then when I looked at the terms of the SBA loan, all the SBA loans were secured by your home. I said, well, why pay a higher rate of interest, go through more forms, more reporting, if at the end of the day, if I fail, I lose my home anyway? Why not just, put my home up there? And, so I in my case, I was willing to risk everything for what ultimately has been, very rewarding. So.
The questions. Your former teacher.
Scott, good to see you. You mentioned that you didn't learn any organizational skills or time management skills or managing people skills in law school. So one, how can we better teach that in law school? Two, how did you learn those skills? By making mistakes in a law firm? By just the long hours learning the politics? Or is there something else that we should be teaching these students to be thinking about as they go through law school and prepare for their careers?
That is a really good question. I don't know how you can teach it there, or if you should be. I mean, I don't think it's the job of higher learning facility to teach people how to organize their lives. I think that you don't teach them how to brush their teeth. I mean, you guys should just figure it out for yourselves. I guess. I don't know. It seems a little elementary. I don't think law school is where it should be taught. I think I don't know. I don't know. I'll tell you how I learned it. I can't answer the first part of your question. I'll tell you how I learned it, and if you can figure out perhaps how to apply it to how you could teach it in law school, have at it. My very first partner that I worked with, his name was Donald Schindler, and he tickled every single email, or it was before email, every single CC. I had a carbon copy of him on every letter correspondence I ever made, and he would put it in a tickler file. And he would follow up with everything, even if it's enclosed herein is a copy of the contract. He would put it in a file system that, a week from then he would say, "What's up with the contract?" I was like, "Whoa, will you stop keeping track of me?" And then it really forced me to learn that anything worth doing is worth following up on to ensure that it gets done. So every single email I ever write, and most of the business I do is involves an email, I flag and ensure that whatever it is I was saying in that email comes to a natural conclusion, either gets done or I finally give up. So and that was the most important thing for me is this sense of FU, and I'm thinking of writing a book called FU. And I intend to be, a bit controversial in this, is you'd be surprised how many people do not follow up. I mean, my lawyers, I send them an email saying, here's attached as a contract, I need your help. And I flag it for a week. And I can bet dollars to donuts every single lawyer I've ever encountered, will require me to say a week later, say, "Hey, did you get my email? Let's talk about it." So, I would encourage you guys just to anything that you start, finish, and create a system. Using, in my case, email, and I have various tools that I use. I use Siri and a tool called Active Inbox and flags. Outlook is horrible for flagging things. I can tell you why, but just flagging stuff. So and then managing people. I mean, dude, lawyers are just horrible at that. I mean, it's just they're horrible. And lawyers are horrible about returning calls and following up. I just know that if you start your practice following up with clients and returning calls, you are ahead of 90% of the lawyers that are out there. You really, really are, because your clients are so used to everyone not following up. So.
Good question. They're being shy. So Shark Tank.
Okay.
What should people know about being on Shark Tank?
All right. So here's the story on Shark Tank. Firstly, I appeared on episode 7, season 3, and you should Google it, watch it, or go look at my website. There's a lot of information on it. I applied with the company SCOTTeVEST, my main company, and I applied for 2 purposes. One, it occurred to me that if I can get the Sharks as partners and raise, $1 million and have them as a minority partners, it'd be nice. But I applied primarily, admittedly, for the publicity, to get in front of, at the time, over 6 million eyeballs, to get them to know SCOTTeVEST. But at the same time, I did want to raise the money as well. Now, so I applied and I sent an email. And within moments after I pressed send, I got a phone call from the producers. "Oh my God, you're perfect for this." Let me get some more water. "We love you. You're through the first level. It's multi-levels. Hang in with us." And we did Skype calls, and they love me. And they said, "Okay, you've made it to the contract part of the process." I said, "Fantastic. Send me the contract." So I read the contract, and buried deep on page 42 in fine print is this language that merely by appearing on the show, you give the producers 5% of your business, whether a deal is done or not. It's like, what? That's ridiculous. A finder's fee? So I said, I've come this far, and now you're telling me this? This is ridiculous. And I thought to myself, well, I've come this far. I'm not willing to give up 5% of SCOTTeVEST at the time, on a run rate of, making a lot of money, and what would have been a value of $1 million in options at no cost to them, other than appearing on the show with no guarantee of a deal, and more importantly, no guarantee of a good edit. I mean, you've seen companies go on there, and they're not there to do good TV for the entrepreneur. They're there for ratings, and whatever course that takes, they're gonna edit it to get good ratings. So I pivoted, and I presented technology-enabled clothing which was a wholly owned subsidiary of my company, intended to own the licensing and the patent rights for the incorporation of wires and clothing, which, mind you, by the way, was my original idea when I started this business. I intended on licensing that technology to North Face, Patagonia, and others, and collect massive royalties, much the way Gore-Tex and Velcro has done, and the like. So I thought this is a perfect opportunity, and and they said that's fine, but if you utter the word SCOTTeVEST, or if you negotiate for the business SCOTTeVEST in any capacity at all, even though we can edit that out, merely by doing so, we believe that you're gaming the system, and you will have to give 5% of SCOTTeVEST to the producers. So I said, fine, and having gone that far. So when you watch my episode, and the moment I start, they all were familiar with my company, SCOTTeVEST, and they're literally, pun intended, baiting me and saying, well, we really want that retail company. They're making all that money. We can't say the name of that retail company because, God forbid, if we said the name, then you'll get the promotion that you want. So we're just going to talk about this ambiguous company, and we're going to fight you for it, hoping that perhaps you're going to spill the beans and negotiate with us, or say the word SCOTTeVEST, and the producers are going to get 5%. And you can imagine how hard it is to stand up there for an hour and talk about a company that you've worked at for, at the time, 10 years, without ever uttering the name of the company. I mean, it was like literally one hand tied behind my back. So when it became clear to me that all they were doing was baiting me into this, I had no other choice than to make some good TV, and I pointed at a couple of them and said they were out. But the story goes further because, they beat up contestants. Don't go on that show or think that show is anything other than a TV show. I mean, let's be adults here. It's a reality TV show. That's what it is. So in my case, I was really pissed, and I was willing to defend my company because one of the things they always ask entrepreneurs is, do you have a patent? Yeah, and most of the entrepreneurs say, well, I've got a patent pending. I have an application. And then they dismiss it as though, oh, my God, that's worth millions. So you've answered the question. Well, patent pending is worth nothing. It's absolutely worth nothing. It only means something if you're willing to pursue it all the way to a patent, and then even still it's worth nothing because you have to be willing to enforce it. And in my case, I did enforce it. And that's a story unto itself that I'd be happy to tell you about. Against the largest names in retailing, including VF Corporation, which owns North Face, among others, and a variety, 27 of the largest clothing companies. And we entered into settlements with all of them. And then after I entered into all those settlements, someone contested my patent, and I went through a reissuance and a reexamination of my patent, and I passed both levels. And then Mark Cuban calls me a patent troll, and thinks that patents are. And I was really mad at him, and I said as much. And the fact of the matter is that although he thought my patent was simple, involving merely a hole in a pocket and a loop, let's look back at Levi's. Levi's is only Levi's because of one thing: they patented a rivet. A little piece of metal on jeans that, to this day, is in all of their clothing that made jeans stronger. It was that distinguishing factor that separated Levi's from all the other dungaree makers at the time, and has turned Levi's into the household name that it is today. Velcro. I mean, there's lots of examples. So I was willing to stand up to Mark Cuban, perhaps the only person ever willing to do so on national TV and otherwise. And he later went on a podcast saying, I tried to make Scott Jordan cry on national TV. So if you watch my episode, you'll see whether he succeeded at that. So I know we're running down. We have about 6 minutes, 5 minutes left until the end of this, and we give massages to all our employees, and I'm up at 11. So. Yeah, I've got. In other words, I have a hard stop at 11. So.
Other questions?
Yes. You had mentioned earlier that some people go to law school not really sure what their intentions are. I kind of find myself in that situation. So there may be some things where we could situate ourselves now to get into the business world later. Is there any advice you could give us on that front?
Come out as a businessman, don't try to start practicing law initially, because if you start practicing law, you'll be viewed as a lawyer. So if at the end of your 3 years you want to go into business, know that you know this, that you will not make as much money as you would on day one as if you were a lawyer. So you're going to get a discounted rate, but you're going to ultimately, in my opinion, you're going to excel faster and you're going to be a smarter businessman than others are. So start to position yourself immediately as a businessman when you graduate, because that day you take your first legal job, guess what? You are a lawyer in other people's minds, and it's hard to break out of that unless you do what I did, and that is just simply do it on your own. That's what I did, and you know what? It was the best thing for me. So, I mean, in my case, if I had gone to a business, I would probably be, some level of more miserable, clearly than I am now. What my secret to success is owning my own time and starting my own business and being an entrepreneur. So, being an entrepreneur is one path of being a business person. It's not the only path. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
You take business school class? Do you wish you'd taken business school classes?
Yeah, I joined MDA. I learned more about business by doing it rather than in class. So, not really.
I'm not necessarily thinking joint degree, but even they're allowed, I forget the numbers, but they're allowed to take a certain number of courses elsewhere in the university towards the law school credit. So
yeah, if you desire, absolutely. If that's your goal, even if it's not your goal to be in business, I think you'd be really, if you can get the credit for doing it, absolutely do it. But if you remember nothing else about this whole talk, I want you to remember one thing: F you. I'm not kidding you. It sounds simple, but you got to do it. So, all right, I've got 2 minutes before my massage.
Your classmate Mike Benz is here.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Scott.
How you doing, man?
I'm good, man.
Where are you? I don't see you. Get in the frame. I can't see you.
Here.
Oh my God, it's good to see you, man. How's it going?
Good. So I'll pick up with what your comment about thinking about going into business. What was your goal when you came to law school? Do you remember telling me this?
Oh, you're talking history now. You're gonna.
Oh,
Oh my.
It's ancient history, I know. But do you remember what you said you wanted to do with your law degree?
Yeah, I started the presentation. I wanted to sue other lawyers.
Oh, did you?
See, I told you, no one liked me. Everyone remembered that. Yeah.
I liked you, Scott. So, but no, Scott. When we got to graduation, I remember we were hanging out at your apartment over at the Triangle, and Scott said, "Look, my goal is to not practice law. My goal is to take my law degree and be a businessman." And look what you did.
Yeah.
Made Mark Cuban cry.
The only person. I don't think I made him cry, but I pissed him off something fierce because he's been following me on Twitter and he's been engaging with me. He actually, he's an ass, but he's a rich lucky. So, so. All right. I enjoyed this. My email is CEO at SCOTTeVEST. Read the book. Please read the book. It's a really good read. If you enjoyed what I did now, you'll enjoy it. It's entertaining. It's not preachy. It's Pocket Man. It's on Amazon. And we provided a link. You can download it. Go and please, if you do read it, let me know what you thought. CEO at SCOTTeVEST, and go on to Amazon and write a good review.